This is Bill High. I'm from Kansas City. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Signatory. We're a global Christian foundation, and we're really excited that you have decided to join us here today for this webinar. This webinar really came about as a result of people who came to us and said, hey, we've got a lot of issues going on. So we titled this Growing and Maintaining Clients in the Chaos of COVID-19, the Psychology and the Opportunity to Win. So we've got a great panel of presenters for you. Dr. Andy Ward, a licensed psychologist. I'll speak briefly as well, and then Evan Lang from our team. So let me tell you a little bit. I'm going to go a little bit deeper into how we got here today. As COVID-19 started going deeper, we started getting phone calls from not only our clients, but from financial advisors who started saying, man, we are getting our phone to ring off the hook and we're having to talk people off of a ledge. And of course, there have been some people who they've got great clients and they know to stay the course. But even last week, I got a phone call from one of our donors who called and said, man, I'm ready to fire my advisors and I need to find a new advisor. I tried to talk him off the ledge, but he was planning to take some money out of the market and put it straight into cash. And we've seen that reaction, and we felt like we needed to encourage people and yet address the problem in a little bit different way. And so we reached out to Dr. Andy Ward and said, could you come on and give us a little bit of perspective? Because we know that you work directly with clients, but you also work with families of wealth. And so you understand the financial issues and some of the issues that come with that as well. So that's how we got to today. Now, before I have Dr. Andy talk, I do want to just give one quick piece of perspective for you, and then I'll pray, and then we'll let Dr. Andy jump in. So here's the perspective. Over the past year, the thing that God has been teaching me through the scriptures consistently is two simple ideas. One is this idea of do not fear. Do not fear. Don't be afraid. And they tell me that that passage is repeated at least 365 times throughout the scriptures. And that do not fear is always followed typically by the statement that I will go before you. And that's the most encouraging thing, I think, is that God's gone before us. He has seen this time and season. He is not surprised. He's not anxious. So that's a good word for us today. So let me pray, and then we're going to jump into the presentation with Dr. Andy. So here we go. Father, we just are grateful for this time today here with us. And thank you for all the people that have joined us from around the country, and just for the good word that you want to share in and through this group of people here on this webinar today. Lord, we commit our time to you and pray that you might be honored. Okay, before we jump into Dr. Andy, he's going to unmute. But the one thing that I did want to point out to you is our time today is going to feature the opportunity for you to be able to ask some Q&A. So if you go to the top of your screen or wherever this is found on your device, there's a Q&A tab. You can submit questions as we go throughout. We'll save some time at the end. And then if you want to use the chat feature throughout, you can also raise questions, points of encouragement, anything that you'd like to share as we go through. So with that, Dr. Andy, why don't you jump in and start talking to us about what you're seeing today?
Well, thank you, Bill. And I want to thank everybody again for joining in today. If your email inbox is like mine, I'm being invited to a lot of these, so we don't take it lightly that you've joined us here today. So thank you for that. I want to spend some time reflecting upon some observations I've had in the near past, as well as ultimately how you as an advisor can be there in a helpful way with the clients you serve. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about how to address fear through adopting resiliency by also adopting a healthy mindset. And as I go through this, I'm going to be sharing not only bits from my clinical practice, but also some of the business consulting experience that I've had. So in terms of my background, by way of introduction, I've been a clinical psychologist now going on 21 years. I've spent a lot of time in the space working with individuals, families, and marriages. But as Bill alluded to, I've also done some work with high net worth families in the family office space. And one thing that I'm seeing right now, and many of my colleagues concur with this, we are absolutely seeing something we have not seen in our lifetime or in a few generations. People are scared, top down. We're seeing across the board this powerful emotion of fear and uncertainty. And certainly I am hearing personally, whether again, it's an individual or family or a company, that people don't necessarily know what to do from an economic standpoint and how to navigate these times. So we're going to try to talk about that briefly. You know, I think as a first step, it would be helpful to really understand what fear is. I think there's a lot of definitions out there, but I really like this one. This is one I ascribe to, which says fear is defined as a powerful and unpleasant reaction caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous or threatening. I like that for multiple reasons. Number one, you can be afraid not just by a person, but certainly an event or anything that's deemed as threatening. But the operant word to pay attention to there is the word belief. If we don't believe something is scary or fearful, that's going to direct our behavior. But if we are believing that something is scary or terrifying, that will also direct our behavior. And so we're going to unpack that notion of belief. One thing also to say about fear is it's actually a normal function of living. It's the way God designed us. It's how our psychology and our physiology is wonderfully and fearfully made. It is not wrong to feel the emotion of fear. In fact, it's really related to the stress response in many ways, in that when we encounter something we perceive or believe is fearful, we're going to go through a cascading effect of changes emotionally, psychologically, and behaviorally. And all of that is to deal with this perceived threat. It's actually a God-given gift. Usually when we talk about fear, though, it's in the context of an emotion. But I think it's just really important to remind all of us today that fear is actually made up of three parts. It is still the emotion that we feel, but it's also cognitive, meaning there are beliefs and there are mindsets around fear. And fear, as we know, there's lots of research behind this, that when a person is feeling scared, we tend to actually think in very rigid black and white needs. And that's going to impact how we behave. We can certainly see that in how people are responding to the markets and with their money. I have permission to share this, but one of my business partners, similar to what Bill said, he actually has liquidated his entire position on everything that he has, and he's gone strictly to cash because he's scared. And that is based upon a belief that this time is not only threatening, but the future will also be threatening. And lastly, physical. Fear affects us physically. You know, if you're sitting in bed at night, you can't sleep, you're having a hard time eating, you're getting more headaches, we know that's the stress response directly related to that fear. But one thing I think is also important to know is that fear can also be very protective, meaning that when you feel scared or when your clients feel scared, it's a time to pause and really ask yourself, is there some sort of action that I need to do, or do I need to pay attention to this emotion? Because maybe it's speaking or communicating to me. Maybe it actually tells me I need to actually focus with more diligence and a little more focus on what's happening around me. And perhaps I need to cluster up with good counsel so that I'm just not making decisions based upon fear, but I'm allowing outside input to influence that in a wise way. What's interesting, though, about our current times is that I think there's a uniqueness to it. Um, One thing I think that makes this fear different than maybe even the '08 recession and other big things that have happened in recent history is that everyone is facing it. I actually read this morning on Fox News that there's a 93% travel ban across the globe right now. 93%. That's billions of people, right? Where everyone has been encouraged to shelter in place and there are restrictions. So we're all in it together. On one hand, it's a little bit comforting knowing that. And yet the mere fact that this is a global issue actually has the tendency to grow our fear. We all know that the media certainly reinforces the fear through its 24/7 news cycle. Um, I have purposely set a boundary on myself as of a few days ago that I am no longer watching the news. I'm actually reading the news. And I went to that way of consuming because I realized that whenever I watched the news, I walked away feeling a little more scared, a little more dysregulated, and a little more uncertain. So one of the ways that I've kind of taken back control of my life is that I get to choose what I read, when I stop. And that's been very helpful. But if we're just inundated with constant messages that are negative or sensational, it will drive fear. I think what's also unique is that this has global implications. You know, what happens now in China affects us. What happens in Europe affects us. What happens in the United States affects other places. And so we can't just view this as a regional issue. This absolutely has tentacles around the globe that is affecting us all. And I think that is making us more scared. And this is a really big one as well. All of us are probably self-quarantining in some fashion with social distancing, etc. The very disruption of our daily lives, I think, also reinforces how serious of an issue this is. And what that can do is ultimately then drive greater fear. And then lastly, I think, and I've even heard this from a few people I've met with, we put a lot of stock into our modern technology, into modern science, modern medicine. We almost tend to think that we are far removed from pandemics of the past and natural disasters of the past. And yet I think what we're coming to see that ultimately our sense of control isn't always as strong as we think it is. I've even heard some people say that our false idols in life now are being torn down. And we're having to really just focus on a security that we can only be found in God. And so our modern world is not insulated from this, and that can also drive that sense of fear. What's fascinating as a social scientist is that just in the last 4 weeks or so, there's been an evolution of what I've seen emotionally go throughout not only the individual, but also sociologically in groups of people. You know, what's interesting is that at first, when corona virus was discussed predominantly in China, there was a lot of ambivalence here in this country, possibly even denial that, you know, this isn't that big of a deal. But one thing changed very quickly. Once they saw how virulent this strain is and how quickly people can get it, things shifted very powerfully into a sense of mass hysteria. This is reflected in people going out and just cleaning out the shelves in the grocery store, people buying all the toilet paper and cleaning supplies. But what was interesting during that time, there was also a sense of resistance, like, you know, I don't know, this is just hysteria. And there was a lot of dismissiveness around those kinds of behaviors. Now that we've had another week or two of that, what I'm seeing is that now people are really settling into the fact of, man, this is going to be for the long haul. And people are either still kind of caught in that paralyzing sense of fear and what that means, or now people are really starting to adopt a resilient mindset and trying to really have the attitude that, you know what, this may not be how fast as I had hoped it would be, but I can get through this. Specifically related to the economic impact, I am absolutely, as I'm sure you are, seeing a lot of worry and insecurity, a lot of uncertainty about the markets and what's going to happen, unsettledness. Interestingly, I'm also seeing an uptick in the sense of anger. People just being angry about the situation, more irritability, etc. Certainly anxiety, even panic, grief. That's an interesting one too. I read an article just a few days ago that suggests a lot of the turmoil we're feeling and some of the irritability and despondency is actually a form of mild grief. In some cases, that's even led to sadness and depression. This also leads to people being very impulsive, just like my colleague has shown. And this is really interesting, this next one, powerlessness. That is one of the most common things I'm hearing, that they just don't have a sense of power. And I think your role in working with people can be to help them understand the role of choice. People still aren't without choices in all of this. And that's one of the most powerful things we can help them see, is that they may not have the choices they want, but they're not without choices. And so that kind of leads me into just some practical things when you work with families to help build a sense of resilience and, frankly, a form of coping as they navigate this. I think number one, our role can be to help people, again, normalize fear, but move from fear to concern. And I like that language. Concern still honors the fact that this is serious. You may have to make adjustments in your course. You may have to consider new ways of protecting assets, etc. But concern really connotates action, empowerment. You can do something about it. Fear, when left to its own devices, tends to grow, and then it becomes paralyzing. So I just like using that language with clients. It's very empowering. Number two, we need to help people move away from worst case scenario thinking. There is over 50 years of solid research that human beings, when we think into the future, close to 70% of the time will likely be negative, pessimistic, cynical. And we actually even know the biological determinants for that, meaning your brain is hardwired to think in this way. But what we can do is help people realize, hey, we don't have to just think on all the things that can go wrong. How about we combat that thinking with best case scenario thinking, or at the very least, mixed case scenario thinking. You know, one of my favorite all-time quotes is from Mark Twain, and he said this near the end of his life. He said, "I am an old man, and I have known a great many trials and tribulations in life, most of which never came true." Now, I think what he's saying to us is that, yes, pay attention to the things you need to pay attention to, but the things usually that we project out in the future, worst case scenario, most of the time it doesn't happen in the way that we fear the most. Sometimes it does, but most of the time it doesn't. And by the way, that's a man who was preceded in death by children, his spouse, and had financial ruin more than once. So he truly is an authority who can speak on that. I think number three, as a strategy in working with people, is just remind them of history. You know, when we do a detailed or even general look at history, markets come back, pandemics end, things do recover. And I really think it's helpful to have that perspective be a part of our thinking as well. I also think that our role is just to help people if they're in a tough spot, emotionally, relationally, or financially, help them to accept the challenges that they're facing rather than resist them. There's an old saying that says, whatever you resist persists, meaning if you just don't like your circumstances and you're just not willing to accept the reality of it, it's going to last twice as long. And in fact, there's actually really good research on that. When a person denies their feelings, they last twice as long. And so our role can be just to come alongside and to gently help them accept the reality of where they're at. When they do that, they can now be more resilient to move into a greater action step for them. And perhaps this one goes without saying, but I absolutely think because we are in the service industry, we need to show empathy and compassion with the people we work with. It's like the old adage that says, you know, people don't really care what you think until they think that you care. And so just showing that basic level of emotional empathy and compassion can go such a long way. And I think in many ways, that's just living out the verse in 1 John that says, perfect love casts out fear. Meaning, how can we show love and empathy, and that will help. So I'm going to turn it over back to my friend Bill, and he's going to continue on. Thank you, guys.
Hey, Andy, before you go back to mute, I do think we've got time. I'd like to just ask you a couple questions, because I'm sure that since you just had this experience with your partner, that there are already a number of questions that would say, how'd you deal with that with a guy that's saying, I want to sell out of the market?
Well, I also realized very quickly that apparently I didn't have as much influence as I thought I did. You know what I first did? I actually just tried to just not jump into the financial issue with him. I just wanted to say, hey, you know, you must be really scared to get you to the point where you wanted to do that. I just want you to know, I'm just really caring about how hard this is for you right now. That would lead you to that decision.
So you demonstrated empathy first.
That's right. And again, maybe this goes without saying, but I think that should always be the start in almost every situation we deal with our clients. Have that relational connection with them. And then you can go into maybe a Socratic method of asking, now tell me your thinking around that. What were you really hoping to achieve by this? Essentially, when I did that with my business partner, he apparently got absolutely creamed from the recession in 2008. And so he's trying to avoid history from repeating itself. And yet when I was asking, well, what are some of the ways you've actually done things different since then? It began to become evident that he is not positioned in the way he was. And so, but he still ultimately let fear rule the day. And I don't ultimately judge him for that. But again, was a little surprised he didn't play the long game on this one a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that was similar to what I experienced with one of our clients that called us, because he told me what he was going to do. So it wasn't that I was going to convince him otherwise. I had to empathize first. I'm sorry you've lost some money. And then start asking him questions. In that regard, one of the things that I found most interesting about your observations is you've said it, and I think it deserves a little more commentary about how truly unique this time is. I mean, this truly is a global situation. Everybody around the world is experiencing this event at the same time, same place, same season. And how big a deal is that really weighing into everything that's going on, particularly this emotional state that people are having? Give us a little more commentary, because I think that's a truly unique observation.
Yeah. Well, as I alluded to recently, I don't know if there's a facet of our life that's not untouched by this. How we're doing grocery shopping. I mean, the other day when I went out to get some basic necessities, I had to stand 6 feet apart from the people in front of me and behind me, and the line wrapped around the building. I'm not going to my bank anymore. I'm doing everything online. I mean, goodness, even my service delivery is all online now. And for someone who loves actually being with people and interacting, this has been really tough, even for me, to adjust to this new medium. And so everyone is experiencing this massive change in the day-to-day, hour-to-hour, even minute-to-minute pacing of life, which is very different than 2008 when we hit the recession and people were impacted emotionally. You could still have a semblance of a normal life doing your normal routine, but you cannot do that. And I think that in and of itself grows fear. Now that we also have little ones at home, who are being educated at home, who have their own sets of fears and insecurities and difficulties adjusting to this, that can also reinforce that sense of fear and insecurity in us.
So it seemed that one of the things that people need to do is develop rhythm and ritual in this disruption of their lives.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Even if it's an artificial set of ways to structure your hours, getting up at the right time, going to bed around the same time, knowing when you're going to exercise, when you're going to eat, when you're going to have family time, when you're going to just walk the pet, right? Having that kind of structure can help us have some semblance of normalcy in our day-to-day life.
Yeah. So one other big question in my mind that kind of hits at the bullseye of what you're talking about, and then we'll start to move on and give a little bit of context. But how do you address this gnawing uncertainty? Because it's not just what people are experiencing with their portfolio, but it's what they're experiencing with the whole of life. And so drill into that idea a little bit deeper, and how can these advisors here with us today address that in a real and constructive way?
Well, I'm a firm believer in putting things to paper. I guess I'm old school in that way, but one of the ways that I have even addressed this issue with myself is I actually physically put down on lists what is worst case scenario, what is best case, what is mixed case. That can allow me to start to ferret out what might be feeding my unsettledness. I'm also spending a lot more time in the Word, just leaning into God's promises for me. And just like you quoted Isaiah 41:10 earlier, when God says fear not, he's not saying don't feel that sense of fear or even unsettledness. It's the tail of that scripture that we should all be reflecting on and meditating on, which is, for I am with you.
Mm.
That's why we can deal with fear, because he is ultimately with us. And that is absolutely a way to grow our resiliency.
Yeah. Very good. I know we'll come back to you in the Q&A part of our discussion, but let me jump ahead and start giving a little bit of perspective here. So we did a webinar last week with a group of nonprofits, and you can imagine for you all on the phone, the fear and uncertainty that the nonprofit world is experiencing. We've seen many of them have events canceled, and for some of them, those events represent the sole lifeline of their ministry. If they didn't have the event, then they may not exist. And so there was definitely a lot of questions and concerns. Now, by the way, when we started the webinar with the nonprofits, they jumped on the chat feature, and there were by and large many optimistic and hopeful comments at the same time, because God's in control. That was one of the great themes. But what we wanted to do in the next few minutes with you is, at the same time that we've given you some perspective about what's happening with the heart and emotion of people in this time, the uncertainty that they're feeling, but also to zoom back out and to give you some perspective about some of the larger structural issues. And the idea behind this is to be able to give you some talking points with the people that you're having these conversations with. So in that regard, I want to talk to you about COVID-19, but not from the perspective, I mean, for many of you, you've probably been on your own webinars with some of the underlying offices that you work with. You've read the news, but I just wanted to give a little bit of it from a factual, but also an issues perspective. And so if you look at the bullet points that we put up here in the slides, look at these more from an issue perspective. We've, as an office, we've done lots of calling. We're having typically 5 text messages, 10 phone calls, 10 emails a day, which is prompting in and of itself a whole set of conversations. But typically the first question that we ask of people is, hey, how are things going? But with that, they do want to talk about COVID-19 a little bit, but not all the medical details and but let's talk about basically what the issues. And so as I see it, there are basically 4 basic issues that are going on. One is simply this longer incubation period. People are walking around asymptomatic for up to 14 days. And so that makes it part of what Andy was talking about, this uncertainty. Am I going to get it? Am I not going to get it? But then there's been this higher infection rate as well. Again, these are issues that we tend to talk about. And then up to now, there's been some higher hospitalization rates. And the fatality rate, by the way, is changing, but it is still higher than a typical flu. So typically in a flu season, we have 15 to 25,000 deaths a year. Right now, where is this going to land? I think, frankly, the longer that we see some testing around the people who didn't walk away. Even my own brother, I think he had COVID-19, but his symptoms were so mild that he never got testing. The last big issue there is ultimately it's an infrastructure issue. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but right now it's just that the hospitals can't handle, there's not enough ICU beds, respirators, and some of the personal protective equipment. Those are basically the issues that are going on. It's not just the medical side of it, it's the structure issue. And so that's what I really wanted to give some perspective on. It's this underlying healthcare support issue that we're seeing as one of the biggest issues. We don't have enough beds to handle it, the fast rate of infection, the fact that people are asymptomatic. But then the other larger structural issue that the COVID-19 has pointed out for us is really the fact of a lack of overall reserves. And you could make that statement across the board at an individual level, whether it's the individual hourly worker, whether it's businesses that have had to lay off people that didn't have reserve, they didn't have cash in the bank, whether it's the nonprofit that didn't have a reserve. One of the things that over the past number of years, for instance, we've been encouraging nonprofits to do is to look much more deeply at the idea of foundation and endowment. That is not an idea that we used to talk about with some of our, particularly our Christian nonprofit world. It was almost a no-go kind of idea. But what we're talking about today is that, man, if you want to do battle into the future, the idea of having a foundation or an endowment account is critical. And so that's something that the Signatory has been able to offer and to serve nonprofits in that way. One of the other structural issues is also this issue of simply some of the supply chain issues. Again, you saw a lot of companies that had or rather the hysteria that prompted some of this buying. And so they simply couldn't keep up. So some of these companies, of course, had very thin inventories. It was almost an immediate or a few day kind of inventory. And so it's all of this has raised these questions about how prepared are we for trouble? And I think, again, consistent with what Andy has talked about, that's the larger question. How prepared are we truly for trouble? We all want to look for a safe place, and it's not just going to be in the amount of toilet paper that we have. That safe place ultimately has to rest and reside in Christ. And I think that's a great question, frankly, to ask your questions to your clients, which is how prepared are you for trouble? And are you truly safe? Now that prompts a whole nother set of questions. So that's COVID-19. What I wanted to drill back down to, though, is even beyond COVID-19 are some of the larger structural issues, even beyond the current crisis. A current crisis tends to reveal the cracks in the foundation above and beyond just that crisis. And so one of the issues that we've written about in a book called Charity Shock is really a demographic issue. And so among the generations of the war generations of the boomers, we see a significant amount of wealth accumulation, but there's been this waning political power. There's this transition where we're seeing the war generations and the boomers begin to transition power, if you will, and influence to the next couple generations, Gen X, the millennials, Gen Z. And within those couple generations, you see a different set of values, frankly, in many cases, where even they're looking to the government for solutions. And you see that even right now, where we're looking to the government for stimulus, but not just stimulus. We're looking at the government for relief. And then from a generosity perspective, we know that the number of givers is declining. I don't want to give the millennials a bad name, because we know that there are some who really get it and they give very radically. But all of these generational issues, we could spend an entire webinar just on this issue. But just to help you understand that there is this larger framework of issues of which COVID-19 has simply exposed a crack in the foundation. And it's this idea that the generational transition is really leading to this clash of values. It's leading to a clash of wealth. How do we use it? You see this in the political debates that are going on. What's the value of family? And if one of the great things that's happening out of this conversation right now is the emphasis on family today, and then giving and institutions. Let me drill down into that idea a little bit more. Some of you have read George Friedman, and he talks about larger structural issues, even and above the demographic issues. And he talks about that there's an institutional cycle, which is really what's the role of government in our world. Great question today. But then he talks about the socioeconomic cycle. Where are we at socially, but where are we at economically? He says that the institution cycle is going to end around the year 2025, and the socioeconomic cycle is going to end around the year 2030. We've never had a time, according to Friedman, where we've had this much overlap. And so in his book, The Storm Before the Calm, a great title, he talks about between the years 2020 and 2030, we're going to have some of the greatest volatility at the government, social issue side of economic issues. These are going to be turbulent times before we come out on the other side. Will it be 10 years or will it be 15 years before America will remake itself? I think you can tie that directly into the demographic issues as well. But all of this to say is that we're in this period where the next decade is going to be marked by volatility. So we're going to have to constructively wrestle, and those are the punch words. Constructively wrestle with a lot of difficult issues all at once in the next 10 years. And you as advisors understand what some of those issues are, whether it be Social Security, whether it be wealth transfer, estate issues, how much do we give to our kids, what's the role of family in our world, which has prompted lots of conversations. What's the role of nonprofits? Should we continue to keep tax exempt status for nonprofits? All of these issues are coming together in the next decade. And so all of this has prompted lots and lots of conversation all in this next whirlwind. COVID-19, as I say, just continues to point to what are these big, big underlying issues. So here's a few handful of practical things that I'll suggest before we hand it over to Evan. One is, man, people, because they're locked in, so make sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date. They might be looking for you before they actually call you. Second is this focus upon family health. And then 3 basic ground rules for communication that we try to share with people. So number 1, be positive. This emphasis that, man, God's got this in control. Just our demeanor as we handle that is just so critical. And then second, be honest. So ask that question, how are you doing? But at the same time, be willing to say, man, I've had my struggles. I've had my moments. And that's that empathy idea that Andy's talked about. And then be direct. So let your yes be yes, let your no be no, with the idea being that sometimes we do need to lean in a little bit and have a hard, honest conversation sometime with somebody that may be struggling. So let me stop there, because part of our promise to you is to make sure that we gave you some practical suggestions on ways that you can look ahead and help your clients here in the coming days. So I'm going to give it over to Evan Lang. So Evan, I'll give it to you. I'm going to let you cover this too, Evan, the family legacy workshops.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. I was thinking there was one more slide coming up. But yeah, one of the things, Bill, part of the practical side, and Bill mentioned this kind of earlier, this breakdown of family with the generational differences and gaps. And one of the things that we've tried to implement at the Signatory, and really through Bill too, is these family legacy workshops. And this is really a 24-hour, 2 half-day periods where you work with families on building their mission, vision, values, just helping a family identify some of these family values. And it's really some of the softer issues, but it's the hard issues that families need to struggle through and work through. And what a better time to start thinking about some of these things. We're all stuck inside. We're all stay at home, shelter at home. And so as you're starting to look around in your family and deciding, wow, we need some of this, start thinking about some of these aspects. And Bill, I don't know if you want to add anything else to this before we move on, because I really want to go into some of the more opportunities of giving and generosity in this moment. And as Dr. Ward already said, we're in this together. So Bill, do you want to add something real quick?
No, I think you nailed it, Evan, which is we are in this together. But one of the things that we've seen, certainly in this environment, is that people are pulling together as family first. It's one of those safe places that helps them overcome fear. And so you as the advisor can dig deeper into that. And we're just trying to give more tools around that as we continue to serve families together.
Excellent. Well, yeah, let's talk about some of these generosity and capturing some opportunities that we have here. Again, you might not think of this time as, hey, most of my clients aren't wanting to talk about generosity or charitable giving, but this is really an exciting time. And there's lots of opportunity here. And I think Dr. Ward mentioned this. I mean, again, in our fear control, this is when we lack control or we feel powerlessness, then we have that fear start to build in. Well, the best thing about generosity and charitable giving is that it gives somebody an avenue of these choices and impact. We talk about this all the time. When generosity is really linked with impact, there is internal neurocortexes in your brain that experience happiness and joy and all of these different chemical things that occur when you give. What a better time to do that right now when we're experiencing fear and anxiety, and that you can be a part of that with your clients to help them to be able to give and show the impact that they can do. So some of the other needs that the clients are experiencing right now, and I mentioned this earlier, we're going to kind of skip around here in these points, but if you look at point 4 here, is they're at home with their family right now. They might be at home with their teenage kids, with their college age kids, which are back home because the semester has been canceled. Start to talk to them about maybe you should attend a family legacy workshop. Maybe we should start to do some of this hard work of building out what your family's values are. What's the family's vision, the mission of the family? Because these are the times when we can start to see, you're in the bunker together, you're in the foxhole, and you're starting to understand where the cracks are maybe. What a great time to start thinking about with family and plan with you, with the advisor. Hey, maybe we should talk about doing this 24-hour period. So start to think about that. Put it on the calendar. It's the best way to do it. Go out far enough that we're out of the stay-at-home, shelter-at-home order, though. So the next, I would say another thing here, too, is we're talking about expense reduction and some of these income tax reductions and by charitable giving. We'll talk about this a little bit in the next slide as well, but really, this is something that the clients are going to experience in this year, in 2020. 2020, we've already had a pretty good hit. We're hitting on the business expense side is increasing because we're losing some income. Our employees still need to get paid. What all these expenses that are occurring, by the way, there's still going to be taxes that are out there. There could be ways to reduce some of that income tax liability through some charitable giving and giving of assets. The real key here is, hey, how can we strategically do this? How can we identify the right assets to potentially give a portion of now to get the biggest income tax benefit right now as well. The second point is true as well. There are going to be businesses that sell in 2020. It's guaranteed. As Bill has talked about many times, I know I've talked about many times, people on this call that I know, you've heard me say this before. There are people that are transitioning from businesses from one generation to the next. The boomer generation is ready to be done with their business. They've hit a point where it's now transitioning to the next generation, potentially selling to private equity or to another third party. And in those transitions, that big liquidity opportunity is a great opportunity for charitable giving. Don't let your client sell their business before you ask them, hey, do you have any charitable intent? Do you plan to give after this big sale? I had a friend of mine who's an M&A attorney. He used to say, just put it on your checklist. If you know your client's going to sell a business, add it to that checklist that you're going to go through on everything as well. Do you have any charitable intent? And just ask the client, because if the answer is yes, you need to stop and give us a phone call, because there are some huge income tax savings on the sale, and a massive charitable impact that can occur as well. One other point here, and this is, we're actually going to have another webinar to talk about this, is the CARES Act. So if you don't know what the CARES Act stands for, it's the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Stimulus Act that was just recently passed a few days ago. And you probably, as Dr. Ward's already said, that I've been flooded with my inbox with summaries of this act and everything else. And I have not read all 854 pages yet. I probably won't read all 854 pages, to be honest with you, but there's going to be some clarifying regulation and potentially clarifying legislation to fix up some of the little issues that are already found in the legislation itself. But there's some big things that you need to know about. So not only is just the individual payment that are going to occur within the next few weeks to individuals, and some of the unemployment relief, the student loan relief as well, but there are some really big significant changes with retirement accounts. So some of the largest are that for IRAs or traditional qualified plans, RMDs will not be required in 2020. So if that client has got a huge hit from their retirement account, they don't have to take an RMD this year, which what a blessing that is. They can, if we're, again, all the economists are out there saying, hey, this is going to be the V type of a hit here, that this is going to go straight back up. What a great way that now your clients can keep money in their account and try to grow it back. But also true is for clients that maybe have had a significant hit in their business or other lifestyle, maybe they lost their job, there's no early withdrawal penalties from these as well for up to $100,000. That 10% penalty that occurred is no longer there, as long as they're using the money because of related to COVID-19 issues. Same is true with loans. They can take twice as much in loans, up to $100,000 of a loan off of your retirement accounts as well. Again, as long as it's related to COVID-19, which I think is very important. Again, we're going to have a whole nother webinar to talk about some of these things with the CARES Act, lots of things as well. But now let's kind of shift and go into really the giving opportunities. So this is what gets me really excited. So I'm a lawyer, Bill's a lawyer. It's kind of probably a funny joke with two lawyers and a psychologist on a webinar, but I get really excited about giving. Yes, a lot of what we get to do at the Signatory, it helps people save taxes, maximize their giving and those types of things. But I get excited, and our foundation gets excited when people give. And so, yes, we have a donor advised fund, and we want to encourage giving. So you've helped your clients probably set up donor advised funds, or you're thinking about donor advised funds and some asset-based givings. You've helped them save, you've helped them plan. Now is an opportunity to help them give. Again, we've already talked about this a little bit. What a great way to make an impact right now with those dollars in a donor advised fund. And to do so strategically. Maybe that money is being invested and we need to invest it a little bit more here or there. or do an impact investment or do something, but maybe look at some really good giving opportunities, because right now can make a significant impact in your community, in your society, and frankly, throughout the world by some of the giving that can happen. One of the things that we've seen a big uptick is the benevolence fund giving. So companies that have corporate benevolence funds, this can be easily set up through the Signatory as well, that the company can set up a fund that can help individuals and employees in need. And so we do this through a partner of ours called Helping Hands Ministries, which is a great ministry itself. And they can actually give to individuals that are in need. And that can be from a rent payment to a medical expense, lots of different things from that. And what's great is the employees can all give into this. And so there's a lot of community aspects that can be built around these benevolence funds. One other quick point here, again, on the CARES Act is that it's changed some things in charitable giving. Now, a lot of these, I will frankly say, we have a lot of confusion right now on some of these aspects of the CARES Act. And I think that there's going to be some clarifying regulation on this. But one of the provisions in there is that there is 100% cash deductions for money given to nonprofits, specific public charities. Now, this is there's going to be a lot of clarification around this, but one thing they did say is that 100% deduction, so that increases from the traditional 60% cash deduction that somebody would receive. So that's 60% of a person's adjusted gross income. So if you're looking at your 1040 tax return, that number at the bottom right, that's your adjusted gross income. You traditionally could deduct up to 60% of that number using gifts of cash to public charities. For 2020, that is increased to 100%. So if somebody made $1 million, they can give $1 million in cash deductions to charity and be able to fully deduct, basically wipe out their income for 2020. What an opportunity, people. Some other things too is corporate giving is increased. So typically for a C corporation, the tax deduction itself is limited to 10% of the company's income. Now for C corporations, that is increased up to 25%. So again, some of the larger companies that we see out here can do some tremendous corporate giving from this as well. The next point, which is really fun, a colleague in in the office here, we talk about the $300 above the line deduction. So this is for people that don't itemize their deductions already for charitable giving. They can give to $300 to public charities and be able to deduct that directly from their income. So this is before you get to your AGI. You're going to be able to deduct this amount if given to a public charity. Now, the negative is, yes, this cannot go to a donor advised fund or a private foundation. It has to go to a public charity. And there's some kind of confusing language around this right now because it looks like it's permanent. We're not sure whether or not it will be or not. We'll see how the regulations go from there. But one thing I do want to talk about is some of the resources that we have at the Signatory to help you through this time period as well. So something that gets me excited is our Signatory team and the resources that we have available is really just amazing. So first, if you just go to our website and go to the signatory.com/advisors, sign up for an e-newsletter. We try to put really practical, helpful information in there that you can go quickly to and pull something out and use that in meetings with clients that you're already walking way through. Some of the things that Bill has on billhigh.com has a newsletter, but also just tremendous family resources. So family values, family vision, some of these things around the Family Legacy Workshop are on there as well. And if you have any specific questions about the Family Legacy Workshop, please email me. My email is on this site as well. But the Signatory team is not just Bill and I. We have people throughout the country. And so if you're talking about with family business owners that are part of your clients, call some people on our team. Call Wendy Rogers. She's out of Virginia. She has been involved. She's a third generation involved in family business, 25 years of experience in family business and in corporate activities, a tremendous resource. You can also call Ben Bell. He's out of Dallas, Texas. He has had over 25 years of experience as a COO and CFO in family-run businesses. We have people that are former business owners like Dale Armstrong, Steve French out of Nashville. We have people that have been corporate and in tech companies like Lynn Urbis. He's out of Denver, Colorado. And for especially advisors, I would strongly recommend, and his email is on here, is call Alan Pratt. Alan Pratt has had decades of experience in the financial advising space, the legacy advising space. He's based out of Seattle, Washington. But Alan is a tremendous resource. He's gone through some of these downturns. He can give you that information right away. And then finally, I would encourage you, check out some of Dr. Ward's information. Andy's email is on here, as well as his website. Tremendous resources as well from there. And I would just, again, encourage you, just keep connected, keep that relationship, and keep that building here. All right, so we wanted to make sure we have some times for questions. And one question, Bill, that I saw that had come in really for you and maybe for me as well is, as we are talking with donors, what are generous people doing right now? So Bill, some of your conversations, the phone calls that you've had, what are you seeing generous people that are already giving tremendously, but maybe they've taken a financial hit? What are they doing?
Well, we know statistically that people with donor advised funds always dig a little bit deeper in time of crisis. And so we are seeing people dig deeper into their donor advised fund to help, whether their favorite ministry, rescue mission kind of opportunities, people in need. But almost immediately we saw people go out to set up benevolent accounts. In some cases, they needed to furlough employees and they wanted to be able to help them. And that's where the helping hands kind of opportunity. We at the Signatory are trying to set up, or are setting up, a fund where people can help families in their local communities. And so you can actually have some opportunity for that as well. But it's the direct gift, being able to see the impact of that gift that we're seeing happen right now and right away.
Excellent. Well, I know for me personally, I've seen some of the donor conversations that I've had, and one was with a business owner who recently is actually in the process of selling his business. And even through text messages, he said, there's nonprofits that are hurting right now. And that was like a light bulb that struck that chord with me. They understand that the nonprofit community and their communities in itself are hurting. And so people want to give. And that's what I love. Generous people, in times of need, they almost become more generous. So that's an exciting aspect.
Hey, let me ask Andy one more question. So Andy, if you might unmute, one of the questions that we forgot to address to you is, of course, one of the other stressors that's going on right now, of course, with all these shelter in place orders. Of course, it can be rich family time, but it can also be points of conflict and stress. Right. So are there words of wisdom that you can give this advisor group here to say, okay, here's how you're going to help families weather some of that as well?
Yeah, sure. Well, I also think that this new world is providing new opportunity. Mental health, telecounseling services are really becoming very popular just over the last few weeks. And so if things are getting really stressful, bring in outside consultation or help. That's what it's there for. And now the service delivery can just be very efficient. And so one of the things I'm very quick to saying to people is, don't wait until you're literally at each other's throats. Get help early and be proactive in that. That's just one thing. I think secondly, it's okay, even if you are clustered together, to ask for some sequestered time. Even if you have to structure that among the family members. I mean, I'm married to an introvert. She loves her alone time. And so just yesterday, she said, I'm going to go in our room and shut the door, and I would love to not be needed for an hour. And I said, yes, dear, absolutely. I'm on the boys. And that's just a way to give back. Essentially what I'm saying is, don't stop saying what you need in this time.
Yeah, that's good. That's a lot of good wisdom. Well, Andy, thank you very much. Evan, thank you. And everybody here with us today, we'll be following up with an email and sharing some of these resources that you've asked for as well. But thank you so much, and continue to carry on. We are in this together. So God bless you.